Hey there. So today's topic is the call for love. This segment is based on chapter 12 in the course, section 1, the judgment of the Holy Spirit. This is for me one of those chapters where I feel like the whole course is explained or entailed in a few pages. It also shows, it's one of those chapters where it shows the impeccable logic where Jesus sets forth his thought system to us, and it's little building blocks from the beginning of the section that build on each other until the end, to the finale. And it's an amazing chapter. For me, when I went through it several times, I have rarely any lines left that aren't underlined. I just wanted to, and even now I go through it, I just want to underline again every line. It's so amazing. On the other hand, it makes clear how much is still to learn, because the call for love is beautiful, but also one of the hardest things to accept and to implement. One of the themes of the section is interpretation. And the Course states that there are always two ways of interpreting something. And one is the ego's interpretation, and the other is the Holy Spirit's interpretation. The Course says, understand that you do not respond to anything directly, but to your interpretation of it. That's we're going through that section 1 in chapter 12. So if we're going back to the driver that took our parking spot from the previous chapter, from the forgiveness chapter. So we're sitting in the parking lot waiting for one car to come out. Car comes out, another driver sneaks in. We get angry or upset in some way. Now, it's important to understand that we don't react to the driver driving into the parking spot. We react to our interpretation of it. And the interpretation, as the Course says, becomes the justification for the response. So we interpret the driver going into that spot a certain way. And how we interpret that act becomes the justification for us, how we interpret the behavior. So basically, between the situation, between the act of somebody driving into the parking spot and our response to it, lies the interpretation. In the middle lies the interpretation of that situation. And we interpret always the buyer's motives and how that relates to us. So bottom line is, when we're in our ego thought system, which is 99.99% of the day, let's just have that as a baseline, right? When we're in our ego, what we want to do throughout the day is get rid of our guilt. So we need scapegoats for that. The driver takes our spot. We interpret his behavior as unacceptable. We get angry at the driver. We have to realize that that was our goal from the start, right? And anger is the mechanism during which the guilt is being pushed out onto the other person. The anger is basically the fuel to attach the guilt to the other person. And our interpretation of the driver's act was the justification for the anger. So we interpret the driver going in a certain way. We justify our anger because of our interpretation. He took my spot. And the Course says, that is why analyzing the motives of others is hazardous to you. If you decide that someone is really trying to attack you or desert you or enslave you, you will respond as if he had actually done so, having made his error real to you. To interpret error is to give it power, and having done this, you will overlook truth. So we believe that the motive or the motivation of the driver stealing is to steal our spot, right? We might believe he's selfish, we might believe he's uncaring, aggressive, or in any other characteristic we can come up with at that point. But how we interpret this driver going into the parking spot is purposive. It prevents us from seeing the driver as he or she truly is, right? It obliterates the truth, as the Course says, in both of us. And we have to realize that that's what we wanted in the first place. So we wanted to feel. We did not want to see the truth in us and in the other driver. We wanted to get rid of our guilt. That was our first motivation. Then the Course says, there's but one interpretation of motivation that makes any sense. And because it is the Holy Spirit's judgment, it requires no effort at all on your part. Every loving thought is true. Everything else is an appeal for healing and for help, regardless of the form it takes. So basically, for the Holy Spirit or Jesus, there are only two ways of interpreting somebody's actions. There is somebody's acting out of love, or somebody's appealing for help and healing. That's the spectrum. There's nothing outside that spectrum and nothing else within it, regardless of the form it takes, right? It can be the form, it can be taking a parking spot, dropping a bomb, stealing candy, or murdering somebody. For the Holy Spirit or Jesus, there are only two ways of seeing. One is somebody's acts lovingly. The other is that person is calling for love, for the help. Then Jesus asks, can anyone be justified in responding with anger to a brother's plea for help? The answer, of course, is no. Right? We cannot be justified in responding in anger to a brother's plea for help. As the Course states, and that's really important, the Course states anger is never justified. That doesn't mean, though, that Jesus says you shouldn't get angry. We're not allowed to get angry. It's not spiritual to get angry. It only means we shouldn't justify it. Once the justification is gone, right? Meaning once we stop interpreting the behavior of somebody else for the purpose of getting rid of our guilt, we can look at the anger for what it is in truth. But for that, we have to stop interpreting the act ourselves. More to that a little further. The next line is crucial. It says, no response can be appropriate except the willingness to give it to him. It is the help. For this and only this is what he's asking for. So the driver cutting into our spot, if we interpreted this act correctly, it is an appeal for help. Obviously, the driver must be in his ego if he's selfish or inconsiderate or aggressive, right? The only reason he's in his ego mind is the very same reason we are in our ego mind. We have made the wrong decision, And now we believe we are sinful and guilty, and God is going to get us. And so is the other driver. Another crucial sentence follows here. There's nothing to prevent you from recognizing all calls for help as exactly what they are, except your own imagined need to attack. I never got this sentence, your imagined need to attack, what that actually meant until recently. So our imagined need to attack is what makes us interpret the driver's actions as sinful. If we wouldn't see ourselves as so vulnerable because we believe we're so sinful, we would not need to attack the other driver and attach our sin or our guilt onto him through our anger. It's our need to attack that fuels our mistaken interpretation of the other's actions and therefore justifies our getting upset. So our need to attack is what fuels, first is the need to attack because we're so sinful, right? We need to attack the other person. Then we mistakenly interpret the driver's actions, and then we justify getting upset or angry, meaning we're pushing the guilt onto him or her. So you can see that this is like a cycle that all starts with us believing that we're sinful. And then the Course says, if you're unwilling to perceive an appeal for help as what it is because you are unwilling to give help and receive it. To fail to recognize a call for help is to refuse help. Would you maintain that you do not need it? It's a good question, and I feel like, I think we're in a pickle in a way. Our right mind interprets the driver's attack, right? Him quickly getting our parking spot as an appeal for help. But we, as the decision maker, have to answer the question, would you maintain that you do not need help with yes? We do maintain that we don't need help. We're stubborn that way, but we're not only stubborn, as we'll see in a little bit. So we're in a conflict state, right? Because we know what the right mind reaction is, and we know what the wrong mind's reaction is, but we can't get to the right mind yet. It's really crucial at this point to look at what we're doing. We're attacking the driver for taking our spot. We're unwilling to see the other's behavior as a plea for help because we don't want to let go of our own ego, right? And then Jesus says that only appreciation is an appropriate response to your brother. Gratitude is due him for both his loving thoughts and his appeals for help. For both are capable of bringing love into your awareness if you perceive them truly. And all your sense of strain comes from your attempts not to do just that, just this. So with those a couple of lines, Jesus gives us his view, right? He says, this is how I see the situation. He knows that this isn't our view, at least not yet, right? He knows because he interprets us correctly, that gratitude, and the other person correctly, that gratitude is due to our brother and nothing but that. He tells us what we feel, that we feel strained because of our constant attempt not to be grateful. Love and gratitude, he says, are our normal response to everything, but we are at this moment not in our natural state. We are in our ego. And that's why we get tired, because we literally try to interpret everything against our nature. Our nature is love. Our nature is a loving response. But we have trained ourselves so intently with the ego that our natural response comes from the ego. And that is the tiring aspect of it. There's another crucial sentence that follows after that. So it's building, one block builds on the other. For to recognize fear is not enough to escape from it, although the recognition is necessary to demonstrate the need for escape. So this is the first time now Jesus in this section introduces fear into this logical, sequential teaching. When I first read it, it came a little bit out of left field. It's like, what does fear have to do with it? And we don't quite get the connection until a little bit later when it says, we have already learned that fear and attack are inevitably associated. A couple of segments ago on this channel, we discussed the guilt projection, the guilt, attack, and fear cycle. And that there cannot be any fear without us having attacked first. We attack first, and then we have the fear of retaliation. If we are afraid of anything, we must have attacked first. And then Jesus says, if only attack produces fear, right? That's that crucial line, that we cannot be afraid without attack. If only attack produces fear. And if you see attack as the call for help that it is, the unreality of fear must dawn on you. For fear is a call for love in the unconscious recognition of what has been denied. And here's where the section comes together, right? Here's where it closes the circle. So fear and attack are connected. Where we find one, there is inevitably the other. If attack is a call for love, then fear must be a call for love as well. And what has been denied can be thought of as the following. Everything after taking the tiny mad idea seriously is fear. We're afraid to decide for Jesus. We're afraid to go to him. Right? We spend so little time in his presence, almost nothing. And that is only because we're afraid. We're also afraid not to attack our brother. Because we do believe love is dangerous. I know that sounds strange, that we believe love is dangerous. We believe that we must protect ourselves at all cost from the memory of God within us. The ego tells us that everything within us is black with sin. If you read lesson 93 in the workbook, Peace and light and love abide within me, I think is the lesson called, but it starts with, you think you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. So we believe the ego that says, if you return home to love, God will have his vengeance on us. He will destroy you. He will take back the life that you stole from him, and you will be punished. Everything we do that is not with the Holy Spirit, everything that we do that is not with Jesus, has as its purpose to deny love. Our whole life is a denial of love. We even go so far as we have made up love. the made-up love that we feel is still a denial of the love that awaits us when we go back home. The thing that has been denied is love. In one sense, what we deny is that we love our brother so much, everybody, that if we were to allow it to dawn on us, we would leap back into the arms of God. But we're so afraid of returning because we still think we're sinful. So fear denies love, but it also calls for it. From the ego, this is the denial of love, right? Fear is the denial of love. For the Holy Spirit, fear is the call for love. And Jesus says, fear is a symptom of your own deep sense of loss. We believe we lost our home, we lost love, we lost God, and we're utterly afraid of returning back because we believe we destroyed love. That's why the non-dualistic thought system of the Course that it's built on is so important, that love doesn't change, right? Oneness, God, everything that's above the blue line, truth, heaven, eternity, God, love, it doesn't change. However much we deny it, however much we attack it, however much we try to get away from it, it does not change. Even if we attack the driver that gets our parking spot, even if we get out of the car and start fighting, the love that is between us does not stop flowing. It's constant. It cannot change. We can deny it, split it off, and go into our conflict state, right? And be completely unaware of it. But it's still there because it cannot change. However much we try to blot it out, it's still there. And as the introduction says, nothing real can be threatened. If something can be threatened, it's not real. And then Jesus says, if when you perceive it in others, the deep sense of loss, if when you perceive it in others and learn to supply the loss, the basic cause of fear is removed. Thereby you teach yourself that fear does not exist in you. And that's, in one sense, the whole process of the Course. That we look at our anger, our hatred, our murderous thoughts, in whatever shape they appear, doesn't matter. And we realize that all of those thoughts are fear. And fear is only a symptom of our own deep sense of loss, of that memory of God. And we ask the Holy Spirit and Jesus to see our brother differently, meaning we supply the loss. Now let's go back for 1 second to the line from a little bit further above. There's nothing to prevent you from recognizing all calls for help as exactly what they are, except your own imagined need to attack. Our imagined need to attack stems from our belief in our own sin. Right? We're trying to get rid of the sin and we project it to somebody else. We listen to the ego that tells us we need to attack the other person in order to be sinless. We don't recognize as he says, all calls for help as exactly what they are, because we're so afraid that God will find us and take back the life we stole from him. That's why we need to attack. We need to get our sin out onto the other person. But perceived correctly, perceived with in our right mind or through Jesus, our imagined need to attack only stems from fear and nothing but fear. And fear is the denial of love. Our attack, therefore, has as its purpose to blot out the love that is there. And here comes the crux of this section. If you would look upon love, which is the world's reality, how could you do better than to recognize in every defense against it the underlying appeal for it? Our defense against love, if you follow it logically, acknowledges love's existence, because without us knowing that love existed, we wouldn't need to defend against it. If love is real, the ego is not. Our defense against love, if perceived correctly, nullifies the ego. Right? If we perceive the attack correctly, the defense against love, it nullifies the ego. In this sense, the defense against love becomes an affirmation of the love that has been denied by the very same defense. And finally, Jesus says, and how could you better learn of this, of its reality, than by answering the appeal for it, by giving it? We can learn of our own perfect sinlessness by answering the call for love with love. This is basically the complete path of A Course in Miracles. To go through the whole ego thought system in very detail, in excruciating detail sometimes in the text, right? If we read the text, we get closer and closer and deeper into the ego thought system, only to realize eventually that the whole thing is a defense against love, and because it is a defense against love, it affirms that love is there. But the ego is obviously not going to give up so easily. We're not going to give up so easily because we're so married to our individual existence. But this takes a very long time, right? The ego cannot and will not let us see attack as a call for love. Its very existence is based on sin is being real, and we are being busy with pushing it outside onto other people. That is the ego's existence. That's the ego's bread and butter. And the ego cannot exist without us being fearful. So the egos, you have to see it this way. In the beginning, which is now, but after the tiny mad idea, after we took the tiny mad idea seriously, the ego told us that we're sinful, and because we're so sinful and guilty, we need to be afraid of God. And however that fear appears, doesn't matter. In the next segment, we're going to go through all the different kinds of the forms and shapes of fear. But the Course basically says that everything that isn't love is fear. However it looks to us, it's all fear. But the ego does not want to let us realize that everything is fear. There's no sin, right? We're just afraid. And if we would acknowledge that we're just afraid, and if we realize that the fear is an affirmation of the love that we're defending against, we would let go of the fear. Because love and the ego cannot coexist. Only one of them is true. And if we would realize that the fear acknowledges the love that is there, we would let it go. So, in one sense, the fear that the ego wants us to experience, to keep us married to it, to keep us bound to it and fused to it, if perceived correctly, is an affirmation of the love that underlies it. And that would free us from the ego. So the ego wants us to experience fear constantly, not a huge amount, just enough to stay with it, right? If we perceive that correctly, if we join with Jesus, because his interpretation is the right one, if we perceive it correctly, that fear, the whole ego thought system, everything we think and do throughout our day is an affirmation of the love that underlies it. If we would realize that, we would be healed. And the section ends with this, the Holy Spirit's interpretation of fear does dispel it. For the awareness of truth cannot be denied. Thus does the Holy Spirit replace fear with love and translate error into truth. And thus will you learn of him how to replace your dream of separation with the fact of unity. For the separation is only the denial of union, and correctly interpreted attests to your eternal knowledge that union is true. So the final sentence brings us back to all the way to the beginning of this section, to the tiny mad idea and the very beginning of the ego thought system, right? So the ego interprets sin, that the separation is real, with real consequences to us, right? Like sin, guilt, fear, the making of the world and such. The interpretation of the Holy Spirit, however, is that the separation is only a denial of union. It has no other function. The separation has no other function than to deny the union. It's a very interesting thought. It's the separation has no goal, or is no goal in itself. It is a means to an end. It is a means to deny union. And as only union is real and separation is not, the only real substance of the separation can be seen as a mechanism to deny union. And if we interpret the separation correctly, it acknowledges that only union is real. I had to write this down because, I went through this chapter, this section, and it was very clear to me. I could see the individual blocks, how they were, how one defense reinforces the other, and then Jesus logically brings us through it to the end where we realize that the whole thing is a defense against love, and that defense is actually an affirmation of the love that is behind it. But the interesting thing is, I can intellectually right now follow it, but I'm having trouble following it on a different level. I can't follow it on a mind level right now, or on an experiential level, which I was able to do before. So that's why I wrote it down anyway, but I read a lot of it because I have this defense against realizing what this all means, right? Because it would be the end of my ego, and I'm not ready to let it go. So learning all this is the goal of the course. So let's go back to the driver for a second. So the driver cuts us off. We should not make the mistake and try to see this as a call for love right away. You know, as we did in the previous segment in forgiveness, we should first see what it does with us, without any kind of judgment or without any kind of spiritualization. We should see what it does to us. We get angry, we get upset, and then we go through the motions, right? And realize that we need to attack the other because we need to get rid of the guilt. And that the driver's behavior, the driver needs to get rid of his sin and his guilt, and he has his ways or her ways to do that, and we have our ways to do that. We both, as the Course says, our imagined need to attack because we think we're so sinful. We should never skip that step, because the whole Course really is built on, the goal is to look at that, to look at this, how deeply we are invested in this sin and guilt. And then we ask Jesus for help, and his interpretation is that the driver called for love and we called for love, and he answered both. And over time we can learn to adapt his response to see everybody as a call for love, everybody's behavior as a call for love. But it's going to be pretty much at the end of this process that we can see it right away. If we could see it right away, right now, we wouldn't need the Course, we wouldn't need Jesus, we would just be in the Holy Spirit all the time. But the moment we have a reaction to the driver, sometimes we don't, but the moment we have a reaction to the driver, we should not deny that. We should go through the motions and look at that, and then go through this process of what I just laid out, what the section 12, section 1 in chapter 12 lays out. And the end will be that we will come very, very close to Jesus's interpretation of it, but it should not be our interpretation, right? Our interpretation, I would say, my job is to judge, and Jesus' job is to see the fear as a call for love that was denied. But that's not my job. My job is to learn that, but until I've learned it, my job is still to judge and then ask for help, rather than me trying to see it as a call for love right away, right? I think that's an important point. I think that's it for today. Thanks.